So first things first, we need to get used to moving up and down the scale with one hand. And as you do this, I invite you to move slowly, and I invite you to really feel each individual note and how hard you're striking it and how much sound you're getting out of it. If you find that two notes sound a little bit different, then I invite you to practice moving between those two notes before you move on up the scale, right? So the goal here is to get as even a tone as possible, as clear a sound as possible, so that it's nice and clean before we move on to the next step. And that's going to make it a lot easier for you to carry on. Easier. So, first things first. Oh, okay. That was quiet. I didn't have the control, so I'm just going to practice this motion. Okay, I feel comfortable with that now. Continue up the scale, right? See what I mean? So take your time with that, both hands, back down as well. And then I want you to go up and down without breaks, switching between each hand. So if I go up and then back down again, and then immediately switch to the next hand. I invite you to do that so that you can hear if there's any difference, again, in control and volume between those two hands, but also feel if there's any difference. If you feel that maybe your non-dominant hand is a little bit less happy about moving that fast, then again, you can really work on that. Do it with a metronome, see what your comfortable tempo seems to be, practice that a few times, make a note of it, come back the next day, see if you can do 10 BPM faster, right? So all of these little things, we can really break down each activity into its tiny components so that we can make sure that we're getting the best out of it and that we're progressing in the way that we want to, and that we're not just doing a sloppy replica of some exercise for no reason, you know? Without pulling it apart into its details, there isn't really much point in doing it. So, once we've got this, it sounds very simple, I know you've all done these exercises before. Once we've got that, then we can move on to the fun bit. So, first stage, again, breaking it down. It's getting a nice, steady pulse on the ding. And again, I invite you to swap hands and make sure that it feels as fluid, that it sounds the same between both hands. So if somebody was listening to you and not watching you, they wouldn't be able to tell that you've switched. That's the goal, right? So as we're doing this, then we can introduce a count. And that count is 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now on that and, I want you to start playing note number 1. 1 and 2. And 3 and 4 and try it the other way around. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Once you've tried with both of those hands in different positions, then once you're ready, we can start moving that up the scale, and that looks like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And 6 and 7 and 8 and, right? So we've got 8 notes up the scale. And then we come back down again. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and. So the numbers are on the ding and the ands are on the notes. Once you've got that, do it the other way around. Make sure you're practicing with both hands. And again, tune in. Make sure that all of those notes sound the same. Make sure you're not varying in tempo. Get a metronome going or a groove. I've got a bunch of grooves on my website, amynailermusic.com. somewhere in there's beats for practice or something like that. And it's all these different jams that are at different tempos, so you can play along. So it's rather than having this metronome kind of screaming at you, if you don't like that, which none of us really do, then you can jam along to that. But I do recommend the simplicity of a metronome sometimes as well, because it really does tell you a lot and teach you a lot. So once you've got that on both sides, then we can bring in the percussive element so that we've got that nice groove feel, right? Ga, 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 gat, 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 ga. Can't beatbox? That's fine, I'm not a beatboxer, I'm a handpan player. So the next step is the groove. And if you haven't grooved before, all we're gonna do, strike the ding. I use my index finger or my middle finger, it kind of varies. And then we move over to the side and give the edge of the instrument in between the notes, right as close to the edge as possible, as far away from the notes as possible, a good slap. And I like to use as much of my finger as possible. I use my strongest finger, which is my middle, and I'm striking a lot harder than I do when I strike the notes. Some people use 2 fingers for this. Some people use these 2. I like to use my middle. Right, so again, same idea, break it down to this part, really get to know this part, and do it with both hands. Oh, my left hand feels weak. And make sure that you're nice and even on both sides before you move on to the next step. The next step is counting. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and. So you can see basically what we're doing is we're just moving the pulse between the ding and the slap. That's all we've changed. Everything else is the same. You can also make this a little bit easier by keeping it all in the center tone here. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, right? Striking on the shoulder of the ding. And when I do that, I like to use this little part on my finger right here, and I'm striking right on the edge, kind of half and half over the tone field and the interstitial. But it's up to you which sound you use. I recommend practicing with both. Then we can put it all together and it looks like this. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and other hand. 1. Whoa, I can't switch in real time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 8 and I messed up at the end because I've got using my non-dominant hand. So your challenge then after this video is to get better at that than I am. And that's it. That is your beginner-friendly scales exercise that I have so much fun with. And once you've really gotten to know that, then you can translate that to a bunch of other grooves and do anything, basically. You can actually do anything. Without messing up at the end there, trying to be too fancy. Right, so the next step would be to play the notes at the same time. Right. So you're playing 2 strikes on each note instead of just the one in between. Then you're getting used to having that both hands down feel and then one hand down and one hand up. Again, 2 hands doing completely different things at the same time, creating this coherent melody groove situation. Once you've really gotten to know that and you feel confident with it, then I invite you to get creative with it and practice using your creative muscle and not just these muscles here. right? So I recommend with every practice that you learn, every new skill, every new drill, you immediately try to put that in context or immediately try to use it in a creative way. That way you're really getting it in your body and in your mind and in your brain, and you're kind of creating ownership of it so that it feels exciting and, you know, something more that you can do. Always stay curious, always see what else you can do, and you might end up coming up with something completely original, which is always a bonus. So for that, when I'm thinking about melodies in situations like this, I like to think about the shapes that I'm making. And I like to think about how different shapes are going to challenge me in different ways, because I have to do different things with it. For instance, here I'm creating this square shape, right? I'm using the corners of the square and just seeing what that sounds like. I could make triangles. Or I could work in specific chords, like maybe these 3 notes. And then move to the other chord on the other side. Then if I wanted to hear those 2 together, I would have to switch hands quickly in the middle. Both created something to challenge myself and created something that's really fun to listen to and to play. So get creative with it, see what you can come up with, and I look forward to seeing where it takes you. If you're interested in an extra level of this, I've done a video of kind of this skill specifically with the melody groove, so check that one out next, and I will see you in the next video.